6:34. The Supreme Court, just around the corner from where I'm sitting now, is considering a pretty basic question this week. What, in law, is a woman? This follows a long fight after a law passed by the Scottish Parliament about the proportion of women on public boards. And that proposed that under the Equality Act, somebody with a gender recognition certificate should be regarded as a woman. This has been vehemently opposed by female campaigners, and I'm joined now by two of them. Susan Smith, Director of For Women Scotland, and Rosie Duffield, the MP for Canterbury, Whitstable and the Villages. Mustn't forget the Villages.
Absolutely.
Right, can I just start by talking about, Susan, the nature of this case? This is something that you have been fighting for how long?
4 years. So initially we went to court and won the first judicial review because they had used a definition of women in the original act that was purely based on self-identification. So it was what name somebody used, what pronouns they used, whether they had an electricity bill, all that sort of stuff. So in effect, the court found they conflated the protected characteristic of gender reassignment with the protected characteristic of sex. And then when that ruling came in, the government then decided to redraft the guidance and said that woman was per the Equality Act. In addition, though, it included people with a GRC, gender recognition certificate, who had the acquired female gender, and excluded any natal females who had the acquired male gender.
So, and I gather in court today, people have been arguing about whether a man can be pregnant, for instance. It takes us some pretty basic issues.
That's right. And astonishingly, today as well, our First Minister, John Swinney, was asked if a man could be pregnant, and he said no, even as his KC was standing up in court and saying that not only could a man be pregnant, but the Gender Recognition Act actually rewrote sex across all legislation and going back in the past. So it would include things like rewriting the definition of woman in, for example, the Abortion Act, which is quite an extraordinary proposition.
So although this is a case which originated in Scotland, is in the Supreme Court here, is it going to have an effect one way or another on the whole UK?
Yes, because it hinges on what the Equality Act means when it talks about sex and when it talks about provisions for women, so single-sex spaces, prisons, all women shortlists, all this sort of thing. The Scottish Government's position is that gender recognition certificate changes your legal rights. So it's a pretty dramatic
It's a much bigger case, perhaps, than I'd realised. I don't know why it's not being talked about across all outlets at the moment. A very, very big moment indeed. Susan, thank you so much for that. Let me turn to Rosie Duffield. Rosie, first of all, your reaction to this case.
I've been following it for years, and Susan's group, For Women Scotland. I think all the feminists I know do, and most of them have been at court for the last couple of days just giving evidence and submitting their definitions for this court case. And frankly, I mean, some of it sounds really crazy and laughable, but it has serious implications for women's spaces, so it's really important.
We don't know which way the judges are going to do.
We don't. No. We won't till January, February, I think.
So it's a very big, long case. Now, I know that a lot of people who campaign on these matters have a terrible time. You've had a pretty terrible time on
sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes on all of this. I have to ask you, Rosie, how does it feel being the Conservative nomination on the relevant select?
It was a surprise. I think they had these two places and decided that, I'd stood up for women and equalities and that they wanted to give me a chance. And so they offered, which is pretty unprecedented, I think, they offered me a place as an independent. I was very grateful.
Let me ask both of you about whether you think the whole sort of intellectual, mental atmosphere on this issue is changing, because, frankly, trans rights have been an absolute sort of core of the left for a very, very long time, something that a lot of people have talked about, very much supported in business. You go into a lot of the sort of corporate headquarters around London, and trans rights are advertised there.
Absolutely.
And yet, at this moment, something seems to be changing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know any feminists that are against trans people having the basic human rights that they're entitled to. They should be entitled to every kind of right. But what we're saying is that those rights that are specifically for women, women's services and women's spaces and women's healthcare, we have to have a clear line and a boundary, and they have to be just for women. And particularly things like refuges and prisons, where women have most of the time got away from violent men. It's absolutely vital. And if we have to go to court for the rest of our lives, we will.
And just sticking with that personal thing, you have very publicly and very vehemently left the Labour family.
Yeah.
Do you feel a bit lonely in the House of Commons now? Do you have your own tribe, or is it quite an isolating thing to do?
Oh, Andrew, I was so isolated by the Labour Party. I couldn't have been more lonely. There are people that I've known for, a decade or so who are too frightened to be seen talking to me, who won't write down messages because they're in black and white on a phone. I couldn't have been more lonely the last few years under the sort of current way that things were going, and I was isolated. So no,
so you
I've
feel
got
happier
friends
now?
who are important to me still, most of whom are Labour politicians, and we talk about politics all the time still, so that hasn't changed.
The personal is always political. Susan, was there a moment which caused you to get involved in this in the first place? Was there some sort of revelatory moment or confrontation or something?
Not really. I think I'd come very much from a sort of centre-left liberal position, and I very much thought that we were talking about vulnerable people. And it was only when I realised that there were men who were just identifying into women and gaining all kinds of access and privileges. And I was quite shocked, and I was shocked that it hadn't been reported on. And this was a long time back, actually, that I woke up to it.
From your point of view, is this the patriarchy wearing a new face?
It is, and actually yesterday our KC, Aidan O'Neill, who was magnificent, was talking about the patriarchy and how this was an example of how the desires of some men rank higher than the rights of women and our safety and dignity.
Is that how it feels to you, Rosie?
Yeah, very much. I mean, we are the majority of people. Most people are female, actually, are women, natal women. And just the fact that we're fighting this, this tiny, tiny group of people who have a genuine issue and a genuine problem, and the fact that it's been pitted as this fight for our rights has just been very draining and very horrible, and nobody wants that. We just want clear legal definitions, and it would help everybody's rights, I think.
Just thinking about what you were saying a second ago about the loneliness of being in the Labour Party.